Becoming wealthy is not so much about your education or background, but about your attitude towards money. In his book, The Psychology of Money, Morgan Housel provides exceptional insights on how to get wealthy, how to stay wealthy, and the mindset it requires. Remember back in 2015 when the story of Ronald Read made international headlines? The janitor, who became a multimillionaire, spread through newspapers and social media. His life was as unremarkable as it could be, but when he died at the age of 92, he left behind $8 million. It turned out that Read saved a little money from his earnings and invested in stocks, allowing his tiny savings to compound into a significant sum, from janitor to multimillionaire. According to Morgan Housel, doing well with money has a little to do with how smart you are and a lot to do with how you behave. Let's take a closer look. Just before Ronald Read passed away, Richard Foscone, a former executive at Merrill Lynch, was making headlines. He was able to retire in his 40s, but his life took a turn for the worse when he borrowed heavily to expand his 18,000 square foot mansion. When the 2008 financial crisis hit, Foscone was forced to declare bankruptcy. The contrast between Ronald Read and Richard Foscone highlights how unique finance is. How can someone with no formal education, background, experience, or connections outperform someone with the best education, background, and connections? Financial success is not a hard science, it's a soft skill where how you behave is more important than what you know. Housel calls this the psychology of money. Let's look at the first lesson from the book. Luck and risk. Bill Gates was fortunate enough to attend one of the few high schools in the world that had a computer. In 1968, approximately 303 million individuals were of high school age worldwide. This means only 1 in a million students had access to a computer. Bill Gates happened to be one of those fortunate few. Luck and risk both represent the truth that outcomes in life are influenced by factors beyond individual effort. Because both luck and risk are difficult to measure and accept, they are often ignored. This can also be applied to the path to wealth. Unsuccessful investors who made smart decisions but faced unfavorable outcomes rarely go down in history. Instead, successful investors who made okay or even reckless decisions and got lucky often become famous. The risky part is that we try to understand which strategies work. In science, this is called survivorship bias. To counter this, focus less on specific individuals and case studies and more on broad patterns. You will get closer to feasible results if you look for general patterns of success and failure. The more common the pattern, the more likely it is to apply to your life. The key is to structure your finances in a way that a bad investment or failure to meet financial goals doesn't bankrupt you, but allows you to keep playing until the odds are finally in your favor. Luckily for us, you can be wrong half the time and still make a fortune. Tails, you win. The outliers in a portfolio can contribute to most of the success and compensate for the underperformers. Heinz Berggruen was an incredibly successful art dealer who sold a portion of his collection for over 100 million euros. Investing in art is subjective and it's difficult to predict which works will become valuable. Berggruen's approach was similar to that of index funds. He bought as much as he could and waited for a few winners to emerge. The lesson is that although the majority of art he acquired had little value, but the few valuable pieces of someone like Picasso made a significant difference. This concept also applies to investing, where a small number of events or investments can greatly impact outcomes. Long tails, the farthest ends of a distribution of outcomes, are hugely influential. Few investments, the outliers in a whole portfolio, contribute to the majority of success. Brad Pitt once said, "I think the simple math is some projects work and some don't. There's no reason to belabor either one, just get on to the next." The distribution of success for public stocks is similar. Most companies perform poorly, a few do well, and a small number become extraordinary winners that account for the majority of the stock market's returns. According to JP Morgan Asset Management, since 1980, 40% of all Russell 3000 stock components lost at least 70% of their value and never recovered. The vast majority of the index's overall returns came from just 7% of the component companies that outperformed by at least 2 standard deviations. If you remove just a few of Berkshire's top investments, its long-term track record is pretty average. Charlie Munger. I don't want to go into too much detail about the next point because I have already made a separate video about it. If you want, check it out. Here's a very brief summary. Confounding Compounding. One of the most powerful ways to accumulate wealth is compound interest, which is often underestimated. 99% of Warren Buffett's wealth was generated by compounding. Charlie Munger once said that the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. It's easy to overlook the potential of compounding because it's not intuitive. Housel gives the following example. If you are asked to calculate this in your head, you can do it in a few seconds. It's 72. If you are asked to calculate this, your head will explode. It's around 134 million. Effective investing isn't necessarily about getting the highest returns. Rather, it is about generating consistently good returns that can be sustained over time. This is where compounding can work its magic. But keep in mind, nothing's free. Everything has a price, but not all prices appear on labels. On paper, it's not a big deal when an investment is down a few %, but in reality it can cause a lot of psychological stress. Consider wanting to purchase a new car. You could pay the full price, find a cheaper used one, or choose to steal it. Obviously, the majority of people would avoid the third option, as the consequences of stealing far outweigh the potential benefits. When it comes to investing in the stock market, some investors choose to accept volatility and upheaval, while others prefer to find an asset with less uncertainty and a lower payoff, the equivalent of a used car. However, many investors attempt to avoid volatility altogether, the equivalent of stealing the car, by trading in and out, trying to sell before a recession and buy before a boom. Given the statistics, this approach often results in underperformance, and investors end up paying double. The money gods do not look highly upon those who seek a reward without paying the price. Investment returns always come with a cost. Generally, you get what you pay for. So consider volatility as a fee that comes with achieving higher returns. The fee for greater returns is higher than that for lower risk alternatives such as cash and bonds. Typically, the longer you can deal with the emotional volatility, the higher the return. If you aren't willing to own a stock for 10 years, don't even think about owning it for 10 minutes. Warren Buffett. The Seduction of Pessimism. There is an iron law in economics. Extremely good and extremely bad circumstances rarely stay that way for long because supply and demand adapt in hard-to-predict ways. If something seems too good to be true, it probably isn't. Be skeptical to a certain extent. Don't let greed lead you into an unfavorable situation. Progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore. Don't get scared by market fluctuations. Act reasonably and not out of emotion. Speaking of scary setbacks, surprise. History is the study of change, ironically used as a map of the future. In his book Fooled by Randomness, Nassim Taleb describes that in ancient Egypt, scribes monitored the Nile's high water level to anticipate possible worst-case scenarios. Similarly, the Fukushima nuclear reactor was constructed to withstand the worst earthquake based on historical data, but it was unable to withstand a tsunami in 2011. History can be a misleading guide to the future of the economy and stock market because it doesn't account for structural changes that are relevant to today's world. The S&P 500 is a prime example of how things can change over time. Financial and technology stocks were almost non-existent 50 years ago, but now account for nearly 40% of the index. Moreover, accounting and auditing standards, as well as market liquidity, have all evolved over time. The further back in history you look, the more general your takeaways should be. Anyone who tracks the economy or investment markets would be wise to keep this in mind. Things that have never happened before happen all the time. Scott Sagan. Therefore, you should always leave room for error. The most important part of every plan is planning on your plan not going according to plan. In World War II, a German tank unit was stationed in reserve outside Stalingrad. When they were needed, engineers discovered that field mice had nested inside the vehicles and had gnawed through the electrical insulation. The Germans had some of the most advanced technology in the world, but they were defeated by field mice. This illustrates that you can plan for every foreseeable risk except the ones that are too absurd to consider, and those events can cause the most harm. In finance, the best way to deal with uncertainty is to widen the margin between your expectations and the realm of possibilities in order to recover from adverse outcomes. Benjamin Graham, widely known as the father of value investing, calls this concept the margin of safety. The key is, leave room for error when projecting your future. This is not a guarantee for a perfect result, but it covers uncertainty to some degree. The best way to achieve felicity is to aim low. Charlie Munger. Also, be aware of optimism bias, an attachment to favorable odds when the downside is unacceptable in any circumstances. You can be risk-loving and yet completely averse to ruin. Nassim Taleb. Taking risks is essential for achieving success, but any risk that has the potential to wipe you out is not worth taking, regardless of the odds. Reasonable over rational. Aiming to be mostly reasonable works better than trying to be coldly rational. An example from the stock market is leverage. By taking on debt to increase your investment, you turn ordinary risks into potential ruin. The higher potential returns can lead us to underestimate the actual risk. You have to survive to succeed. Make sure you are able to play the game long enough for your investments to pay off. Now, let's take a closer look at how to maintain wealth, with principles relevant to all income levels. Being rich versus being wealthy. A person who is rich may have a large amount of money, but if they spend it all quickly or fail to manage it properly, they may quickly become poor again. On the other hand, a person who is truly wealthy has the financial resources and knowledge to maintain their desired lifestyle over time. This requires a combination of frugality and paranoia. Jesse Livermore became immensely wealthy after correctly predicting the stock market crash of October 1929. However, his overconfidence led him to take bigger and bigger risks, borrow more money, and eventually lose everything in the stock market. Despite Livermore's extreme wealth, his inability to sustain it underlines the importance of financial management and caution for everyone, regardless of income level. There is no reason to risk what you have and need for what you don't have and don't need. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy. Getting money and keeping money are two different skills. Good investing is not necessarily about making good decisions. It's about consistently not screwing up. Never enough. The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving. One of the most difficult things about managing one's finances is determining what financial goals to set and sticking to those over time. Rajat Gupta was a former managing director of McKinsey, board member of several major companies, and had a net worth of around $100 million. In 2011, he was accused of sharing confidential information. Gupta was found guilty and sentenced to prison in 2012. After Gupta lost his reputation and his freedom to greed, Warren Buffett said, "If you risk something that is important to you for something that is unimportant to you, it just does not make any sense." Social comparison is the problem. A person earning $500,000 a year would undoubtedly be considered wealthy, but compared to a successful entrepreneur earning $2 million a year, he may feel broke. The entrepreneur, in turn, may compare himself to an even higher income group of peers. This cycle of comparison continues with people like Warren Buffett and Elon Musk, whose incredible fortunes make even the wealth of the 1% of the 1% seem insignificant. Enough is not too little, and no one is impressed with your possessions as much as you are. This is called the man in the car paradox. When you see someone driving a nice car, you rarely think the driver is cool. Instead, you might imagine that you own a car like that yourself, so that people will think you're cool. You might think you want a fancy car or a nice watch, but what you probably want is respect and admiration. And you're more likely to gain those things through kindness and humility than horsepower and chrome. Next, you and me. Beware taking financial cues from people playing a different game than you are. You may have observed other investors and thought, maybe they know something I don't. There are people trading for fun, or hedge fund managers trying to polish their books before the quarter ends. Everyone operates under different circumstances. They have different timelines and reasons for investing and may dump a risky investment faster than you do, leaving you with the bill. Be clear about your investment strategy and time horizon. Don't pay someone else's bills. Be aware that wealth is what you don't see. Spending money to show people how much money you have is the fastest way to have less money. Rihanna, the famous singer, almost went bankrupt due to overspending. Afterwards, her financial advisor questioned, was it really necessary to tell her that if you spend money on things, you will end up with the things and not the money? While it may seem humorous, it is a reality that needs to be acknowledged. Wealth is income not spent. What is the point of being wealthy if its definition implies that the money is not to be spent? Freedom. While the pursuit of wealth is often motivated by a desire for happiness, what brings happiness is subjective and varies from person to person. However, one universal factor is the desire for control over one's life. Essentially, wealth gives you options, flexibility, and offers the opportunity to buy more goods or services in the future than what is currently feasible. The ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want is priceless. It is the highest dividend money pays. Also, you'll change. Long-term planning is harder than it seems because people's goals and desires change over time. There isn't a simple solution to this. Tell a 4-year-old to become a doctor and not a tractor driver, and he'll disagree with every cell in his body. Money's greatest intrinsic value, and this can't be overstated, is its ability to give you control over your time. Using your money to buy time and options has a lifestyle benefit few luxury goods can compete with. That's why saving money isn't such a bad idea. The only factor you can control generates one of the only things that matter. How wonderful! What is the value of saved money that provides the flexibility to switch jobs, retire early, or financial peace of mind? It's impossible to quantify. Unfortunately, aspects we cannot measure are often overlooked. Saving is not restricted to a specific goal. While it is reasonable to save for a car, a home, or retirement, it is equally essential to save for unforeseeable events or circumstances, like the financial equivalent of field mice. The Psychology of Money is an absolute gem. If you'd like to get a copy for your own bookshelf, there's a link in the video description. Also, if you liked the video, please consider subscribing. Thanks for watching.